I'm making another album and I'm continuing our journey through how I am making unique music, developing my unique style through making albums. So if you haven't heard the previous episodes in the series so far, click the link in the show notes and you'll find a playlist of the previous episodes in this series. And I thoroughly recommend you listen to those first before listening to this one, because making unique music was always crucial. And as making music has become cheaper and simpler through the development of technology over the course of my career, I mean, in 1994, when I started, we had to get a bank loan out just to get one sampler, which had like 8 megabytes of memory in it. Megabytes, not gigabytes, for all of the sounds. And it had a screen the size of a digital watch. It was thousands of pounds just to make a single sound. And I mean, just look at it now. As a result of that, the number of people who are making music now has exploded. And in that situation, it was always crucial to focus on developing your unique style. Because if you're going to make music that is the same as everybody else, then what are you competing on? You're simply competing on technical proficiency. If you're making generic music, what makes one thing better than another is largely the technical elements. And this is why we have so much incredibly produced and incredibly skilled generic music now. It sounds incredible, but it's the same as everything else. So if you're interested in a more artistic route, on being an artist rather than a craftist, then you have to focus on making unique music. Because the thing is about unique music is, while of course it's important to make it as good as you possibly can, to make it as technically proficient as you possibly can, the quality of the music isn't solely dependent on the technical proficiency. It's also because people will be having an experience they can't get anywhere else. So in fact, while it might seem to be the case that making unique music is more difficult, it is in fact much easier in a way, because you're not competing with the highly skilled people who are making generic music. You're not competing with these factories of pop hits or whatever it might be. You're not competing with people who are at the very top of their game. You are competing, in effect, with yourself. A good example that's current right now, because she's just released an album, is Billie Eilish. If you go back to when Billie Eilish and Phineas took the world by storm, how is it that they managed to do that when using a $100 microphone in their bedroom? And yes, Billie Eilish has become an incredible singer. I mean, in my personal opinion, I think she's one of the best singers out there. If you listen to the latest album, whether you like the music or not, her voice is absolutely unbelievable. But if you go back and listen to her first music, like Ocean Eyes and things like that, it's not as incredible technically as it is now. I mean, it's highly unlikely to be because of her age, and she's had all of this time to practice. But if you go back and listen to that, why did she make such an enormous splash? How did she break through? Because she was different, because she was unique. I mean, if you listen to Phineas's production, it's not the most technically amazing thing you've ever heard. Now, it's a different situation because obviously they're already huge. But back then, it wasn't the most technically amazing thing you've ever heard. But it was different. The subject matter was different. The world that she was creating was different. Whether you like or can't stand Billie Eilish, there is one thing that is true of her and remains true of her, and that's that she is different. And that's one of the reasons she is so huge. And now that AI music generators like Suno are becoming so good at making generic music, just think about how many more people are going to be able to make music now. I mean, it's orders of magnitude different. And not only that, I mean, if you can literally describe what you want and then have it made, generic music is covered. Just think about the incentives for Spotify. If they have an AI music generator that they don't have to pay royalties to, what are they going to do? They're going to have their own AI music generator creating generic music for people who want generic music. And obviously, there are huge problems with this. There's going to be an entire industry that is destroyed by this situation, and I feel terrible about that. But on the other side, if we look at ourselves as artists, if there is an enormous amount of generic music out there, that also makes the unique artists more valuable. It makes human connection more valuable. It makes the kind of experiences that only you can express to other people more valuable. And this is why I keep saying that what was crucial when technology got cheaper and easier is now urgent. Now that AI is making generic music something a human being can do in the blink of an eye. So in the last couple of episodes, I've shared the first 2 stages of making unique music. And when I say stages, I don't mean that these are linear stages. So the first stage was vision. It's not that we spend a week thinking through our vision, and then the second stage was play, and then we spend a week playing, and then the third stage, which I'm going to talk about today, is synthesis, and then we don't spend a week doing synthesis. This is an ongoing process throughout our creative process. So you will be engaging in vision, play, and synthesis at every stage in a session, but also in completing an album. And so what synthesis is about is, in essence, reviewing what you have done and then deciding what to do next. Now, what is difficult about this step in relation to unique music is due to how the human mind works. And this is really about uncertainty versus certainty. We have survived on this planet, not being the strongest or fastest animal. We have survived partially because our brains cannot stand uncertainty. We use our creativity to avoid uncertainty. We tend to move towards certainty. We desperately want to. And this is the challenge in making unique music. Because when you think about it, if you're making something that you haven't heard before, you've got nothing to compare it to, if it sounds very different from something else, that's going to create an enormous amount of doubt. Whereas if I'm making something within a genre that I can compare it to, well, then that is very certainty creating. Okay, it doesn't sound as good as that. So one of the ways I know I am developing my unique style and not reverting to genre is when I notice myself thinking, I don't know if this is good or bad. I'm not sure. That feeling of doubt is actually a sign that you could be developing your unique style. Now, what's difficult about this is that the doubt you feel about making unique music isn't different from the doubt you feel about the music being crap. So it's not a different kind of doubt. You will just feel doubt. So what we have to do in this synthesis stage is be much less, funnily enough, much less judgmental about what we're doing, much less reactively judgmental. What we want to do is, first of all, in the play stage, we simply want to make the music, do the experiments without focusing too much on our reactions to it. We're simply expressing ourselves using the tools that we have chosen in the vision stage, right? So we're just expressing ourselves and let the music come out. And essentially you want to review what you're doing at 2 different points. One is immediately after a session. Now, I wouldn't recommend, let's say you splurge an idea, I wouldn't recommend that you necessarily do a review after every single splurge. So what I tend to do is I review after a chunk of splurges. Let's say I've got a session of an hour and I do 6 splurges in that time. I will do a review at the end of that 6 sessions. And it wants to be focused on what you immediately felt about what was working and what wasn't in relation to your unique style. And it's okay in that review to express doubt. Well, I'm not sure about this. I think maybe that. So that's one type of review. You're essentially reviewing your process. Then the other type of review, which wants to happen days later, is where you're reviewing the actual music. And what you're looking for are specific ingredients, which I call sonic signposts, which together will form your unique style. So in a previous episode in this series, I can't remember which one, I talked about the difference between a genre and a style, because essentially they're the same thing. They're both categories. Categories that are made up of ingredients, what I call sonic signposts, which when there are a certain number of those ingredients, someone will say, oh, that's house music, or oh, that's drum and bass, or oh, that's Billie Eilish. And the difference between a genre and a style is that Billie Eilish and Phineas, in fact, have chosen the sonic signposts that make up their style. Whereas a generic drum and bass producer has had those sonic signposts chosen for them. They're simply using the sonic signpost determined by the rules of the genre. And an interesting thing about Billie Eilish is if you listen to her latest album, Phineas and her actually use genres to tell a story. They take genres and they're using them in their music to describe a feeling, to express an emotion, to express a feeling. They're purposely actually taking genres and applying them to their music. So they have transcended genre. Frank Ocean does it as well. You know the Frank Ocean track Pyramids? That is doing the same thing. So these artists, their style is stronger than the genre because they are clear. I mean, they might not be consciously clear, but they're intuitively clear on what it is that is Billie Eilish about this, what it is that is Frank Ocean about this. And of course, some people do this intuitively. They do it automatically. But if you're not already doing it intuitively and automatically, if you have a feeling that you are making generic music, then you have to do it consciously. There's no other option. You have to be intentional about this. It's what I've had to do through my career. I've had to push myself to figure out what it is that I need to do. And that's what's caused me to create this approach, to create this framework, to create these methods like reviewing your experiments. So when you are reviewing your experiments, you can say to yourself, oh, there's a little sonic signpost that I can use and reuse. That's something that can form the core of my unique style map. There are going to be some sonic signposts I use all of the time, some I use less of the time, and some I use very rarely. But essentially, these are things that you want to choose. And importantly, they want to be things that aren't already existent in a genre. You can have, obviously, sonic signposts that are already in a genre, but if you don't want to be generic, you're going to have to put unusual things together that supposedly don't work. And this is one of the difficulties. When someone says something doesn't work, often what they actually mean is they've not heard it before. So you have to develop the ability to separate yourself from the immediate reaction that you have, which is often simply about whether you are used to hearing this thing. And you have to ask yourself, is this something that is, number one, authentic to me? Like something that means something to me. Does this sonic signpost make sense to me? Am I doing something that comes from my musical history? Am I doing something that speaks to me? Am I doing something that expresses something about myself? Am I doing something that is a strength of mine? Am I using something that is uniquely me as an artist? And then on the other side, you want to be thinking about purpose. Is this expressing the world that I'm trying to create? Is this something that is expressing the purpose of the music, the unique purpose of the music that I identified in Vision? Because if it's doing both of those things, it is likely to work, even though it might feel unfamiliar. As a result of these reviews, where you're essentially reviewing the progress of your unique music, then what you have to do is set up further experiments, next steps to take, things that you want to do to develop your unique style map and at the same time finish music based upon what worked and what didn't before. And bear in mind, just to hammer this point home, sorry for jumping up and down about it, when I say what worked, what I mean by what worked is this uniquely me? Is this sonic signpost authentically and uniquely me? And number two, does it express a purpose? I don't mean by what works. Am I used to this? Is this familiar to me? And you might think right now, but Mike, if I make music that isn't familiar to me, that maybe I worry doesn't work because it's not familiar to me, won't I alienate people with my music? Well, number one, I believe that because of what's going on with music technology and AI, that the rules are going to change in terms of what alienates people. If people are able to create their own generic music just by saying, I want to hear this kind of thing, that is going to devalue that kind of music. So people will look for something that is made by a human being that they haven't heard before. So that's one thing. The other thing is that through this process of reviewing, you are free to turn up or turn down the dial on this uniqueness. I'm not saying that you have to make music from Mars. So if after a number of these experiments, you're like, do you know what? This is just a bit too weird for me. That's okay. You can bring in some sonic signposts from genres to dial it back a bit. This is an ongoing process where in the synthesis step, you decide which direction to go in. More unique, less unique, what sonic signposts to bring in, what to leave out, which then feeds into the next step, vision, and it keeps going around. What you do in synthesis then leads to a slightly iterated upon vision. And this is how it works in an ongoing fashion, really for the rest of your career, obviously with milestones along the way, because it's absolutely essential that you finish music while doing this. One of the problems, because I've experienced this myself, with this process is that it is endless. It goes on and on and on. So in order to make real progress, what you need to do is finish music and release it and then keep moving on. Because the act of finishing music and releasing it into the world is an essential part of getting a different perspective on it, is an essential part of this reviewing process. If you just stay inside your studio and don't finish and release anything, don't show it to the outside world, don't show it to people who don't know you, then you're not going to get the perspective shift that's absolutely required for this to be truly effective, which is why I'm making albums in order to continue on my unique style journey. So don't forget, a new version of Make an Album with Mike is starting this weekend, and I'll be showing you the exact tools, methods, principles, approaches, and strategies that I'm using to develop my unique style and finish albums. So if you're interested in joining that, the preparation month is starting this weekend. So all you need to do is send me an email to mike@makemusicyourlife.com and I'll send you all the details. So with all that said, I'm going to stop talking about making unique style and start making one.